Okay, welcome back to members of 121 Community Church in Grapevine, Texas, and our ongoing study in the Identity of the New Testament Text by W.N. Pickering. We're going to wrap up chapter 6. It'll be pages 141 to 158, and that'll only leave one chapter to go in the book, which we will split into two parts, but this will conclude chapter 6. Let's go to block 1 and take a look at the early Byzantine manuscripts. We begin with imperial repression of the New Testament manuscripts. During persecution, manuscripts were seized and burned. Diocletian specifically campaigned to destroy New Testament texts. That was around 300 AD. And he focused on Antioch and Asia Minor. The Diocletian campaign. The most reliable manuscripts were hidden. Included among these texts was the Biblia Pauperum, or the Bible of the Poor. What was the Bible of the Poor? It was the Biblia Pauperum. It was a catechism for young people, and it went through 5 editions. So the 5 editions of the Biblia Pauperum. It was so popular that copies just wore out. And that happened to many Byzantine texts as well. Evidence for an early Byzantine text. Do we have texts prior to the 4th century? Yes, and we have church father usage to verify this testimony. Irenaeus, around 202, gave us a 16% usage of the majority text. Clement of Alexandria, around 215, a 15% usage. Origen, 254, around a 17% usage. And then as we get into a later date, Chrysostom in 407 had about a 40% usage of the majority text. So it did increase in usage, but there is evidence during the 3rd century of a Byzantine text usage. Let's go to block 2 and take a look at evidence from early papyri. Clement of Alexandria in 215 AD. 3rd century. When he was referencing Mark 10, he did not prefer the Alexandrian text. He overwhelmingly preferred the Byzantine text. To Clement's preference for the majority text. Most quotations were from memory, but his preference did show that Byzantine text was never a secondary development. The Byzantine text could be objectively defined. The early papyri. Marian preferred the majority text. In the middle of the 2nd century, there are 152 places where you find early papyri on the side of the Byzantine text, and another 195 places that have Byzantine support. So, block 1 and block 2, Pickering gives us church father support and early papyri support for a generally agreed upon Byzantine text and a Byzantine archetype. And that is going to build to what he wants to do next, and that is very simply he wants to shape his conclusions for us in the remaining part of chapter 6. Let's go to block 3 and listen to Pickering conclude. Basically, he's concluding chapter 5 and 6. So let's take a look at note 1. A Western archetype has never been reconstructed. The Western text cannot represent the original. The Alexandrian archetype was never reconstructed either. Absence of Western and Alexandrian archetypes. Vaticanus V is only 72% pure. Alexandrian texts disagree among themselves. There is a great deal of random variation. Alexandrian random variations. The Alexandrian text cannot represent the original, but the Byzantine archetype can be reconstructed with 98% certainty. The Byzantine archetype. There is a strong central current in these texts called the family 35, which has a very precise profile. Family 35 represents the original text. Family 35, the Byzantine text, did exist in the 2nd century. Witnesses should be weighed and counted. Hort equated weighing with internal evidence, meaning it must fit the context and it must explain the alternate readings. However, the process of internal evidence is highly, highly subjective. Weighing as subjective. Pickering says we must define an objective procedure by demonstrating the habits of the witnesses. Sinaiticus and Vaticanus B have 3,000 mistakes between them. Weighing the witnesses. Sinaiticus and Vaticanus B are not good witnesses. They were never copied. They were never trusted and copied. We must also consider counting. There must be a mutual dependence among witnesses, and the Hort theory is erroneous. The Byzantine text gives us the best opportunity to reconstruct the original. That is absolutely the case. And so what we have to really allow Pickering to imprint in our minds is Block 1, Note 5. Evidence for early Byzantine text. And we can just look at that usage. Irenaeus, 202, there was a 16% usage. Clement of Alexandria, 215, it increases to about the same 15% usage. But Origen, 254, 17% usage. Chrysostom, 407 AD, a jump to 40% usage. But there is usage in the 3rd century. And so there is early evidence, early testimony for a Byzantine text. It is not a secondary 4th century text only. Then the early papyri in Block 2. We have Block 2, Note 3. Marian preferred the majority text in the middle of the 2nd century. There are 152 places we find in early papyri on the side of the Byzantine text, and another 195 where the texts have Byzantine support. So church father usage and early papyri testimony gives us a foundation to affirm the Byzantine text as a primary text, not a secondary development. That is Pickering's posited conclusion. And that's why he takes us in the conclusion to Block 3, Note 6, weighing and counting together must be considered. It must fit the context, it must explain the alternate readings. However, it cannot simply be internal evidence and subjective procedure. It has to be objective procedure by demonstrating habits of the witnesses. Sinaiticus and Vaticanus B have 3,000 mistakes between them. Sinaiticus and Vaticanus B are not good witnesses. They were never copied. And then if you go on to counting, we look for mutual dependence among the witnesses. The Hort theory is erroneous. Byzantine texts give us the best opportunity to reconstruct the original. And Pickering calls this the Family 35. He says there's a strong central current within the Byzantine text. He calls it Family 35. I'm sure we'll get into more of that in the concluding chapter. But this gives us excellent additional content that really wraps up chapter 5 and 6 together, really, because that's his real positive, critical contribution. But it really does come together here and show us that the Byzantine text is to be considered the primary, not the secondary text, and that it is supported by early church father usage and early papyri evidence. All of that must be compiled together. So we get tremendous help here in pages 141 to 158. That just leaves us chapter 7, and that's a 40-page chapter. We're going to split it into two 20-page parts. So we will have a 7a and a 7b to conclude our study. But the important thing to remember here on the chart is Block 1, Note 5, the early church father usage of the Byzantine text. And then block 2, note 3, the nearly, 152 and 195 places of early papyri evidence for Byzantine support. So that foundation is laid down in block 1 and block 2 so that the conclusion in block 3 can be given, which is block 3, note 4. The Byzantine archetype. There's a strong central current in these texts called the family 35. It has a very precise profile. Family 35 represents the original autograph text. That is the conclusion that he draws. Then he goes on from there to tell us that the Hort theory is erroneous, and the Byzantine text will give us the best opportunity to reconstruct the original autograph. And he considers it still possible to reconstruct the original autograph. That is included in his conclusion. So that will wrap up 6B and 6C, pages 141 to 158. And next we will take a look at chapter 7. It's 40 pages. We will split it into 7A, 20 pages, and 7B, 20 pages. So we'll have 2 lessons to go after this. That wraps up chapter 6.